Welcome back to Soulful Tales, a quiet place for stories that linger, softly, deeply, and sometimes painfully. Some people live their whole lives in motion, constantly traveling, chasing, leaving. And then there are those who stay. They don't move, they don't leave. They wait. I met one of them. He sat at platform 3 every afternoon, right as the sun dipped below the hills. Same time, same seat, same gaze, fixed at the tracks that had long gone quiet. At first, I thought he was just a strange old man with nowhere else to be. But over time, I realized he wasn't waiting for a train. He was waiting for a memory. This is his story, and perhaps a little bit of mine too. If you find beauty in quiet stories like this, stories of waiting, of love, of time that never quite healed, we invite you to subscribe to Soulful Tales. Leave us a comment if this reminds you of someone, and don't forget to like and share if it touches your heart. Now, take a breath. The train is about to arrive. They called it a station with no trains. The tracks were rusted, the signs faded, the ticket booth hadn't printed anything in over 2 decades. But every day, like clockwork, he came, old coat, worn hat, a notebook under his arm. He'd sit on the third bench from the left and stare down the tracks as if something or someone was coming. At first, we all assumed he was confused. Maybe he had dementia. Maybe he was waiting for a train that only existed in his memories. No one bothered him. He didn't talk to anyone. But I watched him, every day. At exactly 4:17 p.m., he would arrive, sit, stay, leave at sunset. One day, curiosity won. I walked over and sat near him, pretending to look at my phone. He didn't even glance my way. But I saw it, in his latchbook, filled with delicate pencil drawings. And they were all of the same woman, same eyes, same smile. Different settings, but always her. Sometimes at a window, sometimes by a train. Sometimes in a garden with her hair pinned up like it was a different decade. The next day, I brought him tea. He nodded, whispered, "Thank you," and went back to drawing. That was our entire exchange. But somehow it felt like something shifted. I didn't know his name. He didn't know mine. But I started calling him Mr. Platform in my head. It became a ritual. He came. I brought tea. We sat, in silence, and I began to wonder, who was she? Why did he draw her again and again? And what kind of love makes someone wait this long? The first time I saw what he was drawing, it felt like opening a door into someone's soul. The lines were soft, deliberate. He wasn't just sketching, he was remembering. Every page of the sketchbook held a different version of her. Same woman, always her. Sometimes in a scarf with windswept hair, sometimes laughing, caught mid-motion like a memory too vivid to fade. And sometimes, she looked like she was waiting too. I never asked who she was. I was afraid that asking would break the silence we'd somehow built between us. But I noticed things. He used the same pencil every time, sharpened to the same point. He never used color, only graphite, shadow, and smudges from his own fingers. And when he looked at the finished sketches, he smiled. Not with joy, but with ache. One afternoon, I sat beside him, pretending to sip my coffee. He closed the sketchbook gently and placed it on his lap. "She never got on the train," he said, almost in a whisper. I turned to him, startled. It was the first time he spoke more than 2 words. He didn't look at me, just at the tracks. "She said she would." I waited. I still do. There was no bitterness in his voice, no anger, just fact, like saying, "It rained yesterday," or "Autumn is coming." I wanted to know more. But he stood up, nodded politely, and walked away, his cane tapping against the concrete like the ticking of a slow, patient clock. He left the sketchbook on the bench, just for a moment, and I opened it. The last page was unfinished, only her outline, her face not yet drawn, and beneath it in delicate, shaky handwriting, "I wonder if she'd still recognize me." That night, I didn't sleep. That sentence looped in my mind like an old song, not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. He didn't return the next day, or the day after that. For the first time in over a year, the third bench sat empty, and in its absence, the station felt wrong. I waited, a week, then 2. On the 14th day, the station manager approached me quietly. He handed me a brown envelope. "He asked me to give you this, said you'd know what to do." Inside, a note and the sketchbook. The note was written on old stationery, the kind you only find in antique shops or forgotten drawers. It read, "Her name was Evelyn. Platform 3 was ours. I was supposed to go. She waited. Then she left. If you want to understand, find the letter she never replied to. Postmark 1975. That was all. No signature, no goodbye, just that one clue. I spent hours turning the sketchbook's pages again. This time I wasn't looking at the art, I was looking for a trail, and on the inside cover, barely legible beneath a graphite smudge, was a name, E. Hargrave, and an address in the countryside, long outdated. I didn't hesitate. The next morning I booked a train, not metaphorically but an actual train, heading north, to a town I'd never heard of, to find a letter from 1975, to meet someone who perhaps still remembered a man who never stopped waiting. The town was smaller than I imagined. 2 cafes, 1 post office, no signal. I walked to the address listed in the sketchbook, not expecting much. The house was still there, tired but proud, like it had been waiting too. An elderly woman answered the door. Her silver hair was tied neatly, her eyes sharp and her voice calm. "Evelyn Hargrave?" I asked. She paused. "I was. A long time ago." When I mentioned the man at the station, something shifted in her face, like a ripple in water that had been still too long. We sat in her sunroom. She made tea, black, strong, no sugar. And when I showed her the sketchbook, she didn't touch it. She only stared. "I thought he'd forgotten," she said. "But I should have known better." And then, as if a dam broke gently, she began to speak. They met in 1974. He was a traveling artist. She, a war widow, working at the station cafe. They weren't supposed to fall in love, but they did. He was offered a scholarship in France. She urged him to go. "I'll wait," she promised. He kissed her cheek and said he'd be back in a year. 1 year turned to 2. Letters stopped coming, and by the 3rd spring, she stopped checking the mailbox. "I thought he moved on," she whispered, "so I moved away." But he didn't. He came back, and he waited. And she never knew. We sat in silence for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured more tea. Outside, birds chirped like they didn't know any better. She asked, "Did he ever say anything about me?" I nodded. "He never stopped drawing you." A single tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "I kept something," she said, and stood. From an old drawer, she pulled out a box, velvet-lined and aged with time. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to him, all unsent. I wrote, but never posted them. I didn't know where he was, and I was ashamed for giving up. One letter was dated July 1975. The ink had faded, but the words still breathed. "I went to Platform 3 today. You weren't there. Maybe you forgot, or maybe I hoped for too much. But if you ever come back, I'll be here. Just knock." He never did. He had returned to the station months later, but she was already gone. So he waited, not knowing she had waited too. A tragedy not of betrayal, but of poor timing and missed signals. Of silence. Of love that stayed just long enough to ache, but not long enough to speak. Before I left, Evelyn handed me one final thing. A sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, unopened, unstamped. "Would you," she hesitated, "bring this to him?" I held it with both hands. There was no address, no name, just, "To the man who waited." I returned to the station a day later and sat on the 3rd bench from the left. The sketchbook still rested in my bag, the letter in my coat pocket, and the emptiness beside me, too full to name. I didn't open it. Some letters aren't meant to be read, they're meant to be held, felt, left behind like footprints on quiet ground. As the sun dipped, I placed the letter under the bench, right where he used to rest his cane. Maybe it was too late for answers, but maybe not too late for closure. I kept going back, not because I expected him to return, but because something in me changed. I began to understand what it meant to wait, not for someone, but for peace. He had spent decades not asking why, but simply being there, still, steady. He didn't chase love, he honored it. The station isn't listed on any maps now, trains don't pass through anymore, but the 3rd bench remains. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, it carries the scent of old pages and distant rain. A place doesn't hold memory. People do. He waited. She never came. And still, he waited. Not because he believed she would return, but because the waiting itself became love. And maybe that's the saddest, most beautiful kind. Some stories don't need thunder to be powerful. Some goodbyes don't need grand gestures to be remembered. Sometimes all it takes is an empty bench on a quiet platform. Some people move on, some people forget, and some, they stay. If this story found its way into your heart, let it sit there for a moment. And if you've ever waited for something or someone you couldn't name, you're not alone. Thank you for spending time with us here at Soulful Tales. If these quiet stories speak to something inside you, we invite you to subscribe for more. Leave us a comment. Have you ever waited for someone without knowing why? Or found a memory still sitting where you left it? And don't forget to like and share, especially if you know someone who still checks an old platform, just in case. We'll be here every week, waiting. Until next time.